resistant. So I kind of tell them, you're going to have to do a bit of fitness, lose some weight, walk, and whatever you can do, walk, run, that sort of stuff. You're going to do a little bit of strength training. And lots of people, when I see them, they're so miserable with their back that they can't actually, say, what do you mean exercise? Can barely move. So we tell them aquatic fitness, get in the water, the buoyancy, resistance, jump, and that'll help your bones and joints and muscles get stronger. And then we work at the flexibility part, like, trying to stretch the muscles and that. I think using a combination of those three approaches are the best thing for rehab and helping that type of patient that's coming in, with some type of disorder or, ailment that's just not letting them function in life.
Right. And Dane, you deal with people with tons of different health conditions. What's your approach with folks like that?
Yeah, I think that I would echo a lot of what Vic said. The variety of movement is so important, and I think sometimes that can, overwhelm people because they want to know, what's right for them or what's the best or what should I be prioritizing. But it is really a blend of all of those things, and taking into consideration, what your daily needs are. So if you're not, participating in high-intensity sport, you might not need to train like an Olympic athlete, but maybe you just need enough ability to reach your hands up over your head and, open the cupboard door, or carry your kid around, or, complete your daily tasks. So taking a good stock at what it is you do on a daily basis, and then kind of letting your training kind of be shaped around that so that you're able to be supported in whatever goals you might have, and also, again, in whatever it is that you do as you go about your life.
Okay, well, so let's dig a little bit deeper into cardio, and then we'll hit the other two after this. But when it comes to cardio, you said interval training and sort of like an endurance type training. Can you sort of outline the benefits for each day?
There's a little bit different approaches to each of these types of training, and again, different, rewards as well. I'll look at interval training first. I think that's actually quite common. It's often known as HIIT training or high-intensity interval training. And as mentioned, it's performed in shorter bouts at greater intensities. Very common form of this, and what we've been seeing online is circuit training. So you have that defined working and rest period. Right. Also, again, like sprint training. So say, for example, sprinting for a certain period of time, resting, and then going back at that again. I think a lot of people look at this high-intensity interval training as a good bang for your buck. It's right. Quick, you get a sweat on. It often offers a lot of variety in movement as well. So I find that a lot of people really enjoy that. I think the thing that's really important, and even just to bounce off of what Vic said, is that although HIIT training is a good bang for your buck in terms of how long the actual training session is, because it's high intensity, you do have to spend some time warming up and preparing for those movements as well. Right. Because otherwise you're just jumping in cold and it might not go so well in the long run. Exactly. And then we look at endurance training, otherwise known sometimes as low-intensity steady state, typically involves the repetition of a particular movement pattern over and over again for an extended period of time. So we think about like biking, cycling, swimming, something like that. You're doing the same movement over and over again at a pace that is sustainable for a long period of time. So, of course, low-intensity steady state, being known as endurance training, it does help promote gains in endurance, and it often can allow us to have active recovery as well. So you can do it at a little bit more of a relaxed pace. It might not be so hard on your body. The thing to consider as well, though, is that there's research being shown that high-intensity interval training has also been shown to help develop improvements in endurance, quite similar to that low-intensity steady state. So I think that there's some opportunity for people to kind of choose what they like best and also what their body might need depending on, how fatigued they are from other things they've done that week.
Okay, so Vic, when you're doing these different types of training, the interval or sort of steady state training, what's happening inside the body for people?
Well, basically exercise, whether you're doing endurance training or interval training, it depends on what you're training for, right? If you're a high-level athlete, doing interval training, you're looking maybe for power, explosiveness, different types of aspects, right? And your body adapts to the various types of training, your actual goal for training, whether you're doing it, just to be a healthy individual or you're actually doing it to be, explosive hockey player, quick soccer player. You're doing, weightlifting to the Olympic, heavy lifting. So all those aspects are different. But the general effect on the body, when you do all types of exercise, it's beneficial. So every system in your body, from cardiovascular, skeletal, respiratory, renal, all benefit from exercises, right? We've seen that in studies throughout time. And, just let's take muscle and joints, majority of what I deal with, right? So if you start exercising, your bone density increases, your muscle strength increases, your endurance to walk, your ability to walk farther, your ability to, carry your groceries. All these little things start to add up in your life, and you see a difference in that sort of stuff. Then you look at the cardiovascular side of it, where you go for a walk, you go maybe 2 blocks. Sometimes you go 3 blocks. Yeah, you can play with your kids longer. You can hold your kids up. And these are what are measurable for most people in society. And, when you start looking at individuals or athletes, who are doing the HIIT training and that, they're doing for specific sports, specific possible training. They notice their times are better. They're faster on the ice. Their skill level improves. Their, different things, aspects. So it all depends on your goal. But your actual body, how it responds to exercise is always in a positive manner, no matter who you are.
So, Dane, hoping you can walk the listening audience through what a good cardio workout would look like at home.
I think that one of the most important things to consider when we are looking at developing a workout routine is that we really consider what our interests and abilities are. One of the questions that I get a lot from people is, what is the best? What's the best type of cardio, whether it's for fat loss or for, developing speed or endurance or whatever it is? And my answer often goes back to the person, what do you like to do? So I think that in developing a cardiovascular routine, we want to consider a type of movement that we enjoy, and then we also want to consider our intensity so that, our breathing rate is elevated, our heart rate is elevated, and these are kind of physiological things that we can sense and be aware of so that we can know that we're being challenged. So, for example, someone like myself, I don't really love to jog, but I like to sprint. I also like to walk, and I also like to hike. So for something that someone like myself might do, thinking about what my interests are, is that I could probably go for a hike. I could go up around Signal Hill, something like that, as long as I'm 6 feet away from everybody around me. But I could do that, and that would that would take up a certain period of time, and that would be kind of a low intensity, steady state type of workout or an endurance type of training. And if I wanted to actually make it challenging for myself, it would go from a leisurely stroll to something where I'm just pushing myself that maybe it's a little bit harder for me to carry a conversation, and my breathing is getting challenged, especially in somewhere like St. John's. If you're outside, there's a lot of hills. I live downtown, and sometimes there are times that I have to stop talking and buckle down because the added challenge of the incline is actually increasing my breathing. So something as simple as going for a walk for an hour or so, could be something that is very manageable. And for some people, like I gave, the hours as an example, for some people, maybe it's 10 minutes, maybe it's 20 minutes, and maybe that varies from day to day. Looking at intervals, you can do something at home like set up a little circuit. And again, depending on what you're interested in or what you like, it might be a circuit of maybe you're jumping around kind of like you're skipping, say for like 45 seconds, and then you take 15, 20, 25 seconds off, and then maybe you're doing squats for 45 seconds. You rest again, 15, 20, 25 seconds, whatever it is, and then you go to do something else. So there's opportunity there to kind of give yourself some movement variety. I think a really common interval pattern that people know is Tabata, and that's 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off. And during those 20 seconds, you're doing just as much as you can. Then you take 10 seconds of rest. And 10 seconds is very short, so that'll get you going in no time. And I think that the Tabata sequence is actually only 4 minutes long in most instances, and that's because it is so hard if you're working at a high intensity during those rest periods.
Yeah, I know there's actually a Tabata timer online for any of the listeners that are looking at having a workout timer. They can access that. And, it's funny because I think that people underestimate just how hard something gets after 20 seconds of contraction time. If you go to the gym and do 10 reps, it can only take you 10 seconds. But if you're doing 40 seconds of exercise, that can really a body weight squat becomes pretty heavy after a while.
Absolutely.
So that kind of leads us into the next area, guys, is that we've talked about cardio. And then the other type of exercise we kind of looked at was resistance training. Like you guys kind of described it earlier, but a lot of people I think are still probably stuck on weight training specifically, and people going to the gym and bench pressing as much as they can. Vic, why don't you clarify what resistance training is?
Resistance training is basically taking your joint and muscles to a range of motion and having some resistance beyond gravity. I mean, that's the real basis of it. You have some weight that you're actually providing to a muscle and a joint that's more than just gravity would be. So that could be anything really. Like, you could use weights, you could use your own body in terms of doing push-ups. So any aspect of that kind of thing is a technical definition of it. But traditionally in society, we think of resistance training of, maneuvering and, anything heavy, weights, pull-ups, chin-ups, that kind of stuff. But you think if you don't have weights on then, you're using your body weight, and sometimes you use a belt. So I guess it's kind of variable for each individual what they think about it. But it's really, the traditional part where you're separated from the cardio room and you're in the weight room and you see all the guys just pushing weight. That's what the belief is, and that's probably most likely what most people would think about it.
And when you put it all together, It can be different depending on what you're doing for exercise. For example, like it's almost like a recipe with you might have an ingredient like a squat, but you can put a different amount in or put it at a different time in the recipe, and that makes it taste different. So Dane, like one of the big things people can play around with are things like their sets, the reps and rests. Can you walk people through what the variables are that can be tweaked when people are doing exercise?
Yeah, absolutely. So sets are just a group of repetitions. And of course, to move into the next definition then, the repetition is one full cycle of a movement pattern. So to bounce off of the example of the squat, one full rep of a squat would be all the way to the bottom of the squat and then returning back to your starting position. Say, for example, you have a set of squats. You might do like, say, 10, 12, 15 squats in your set. You might also decide that you're doing a certain number of sets in your workout. And then in amongst your sets and reps, you also have your rest intervals. So tying into some of our discussion about cardiovascular training and interval training, if you wanted to get your heart rate up more without doing, say, like a traditional cardio workout, you could be doing resistance training with a shorter rest interval between your sets so that your heart rate stays elevated as you're moving.
But that's another thing, actually. People, they're like, well, I can't, my chest is tired. Well, that's when you can train your legs, and then you can train your core, and then you can train your arms, and you go back to your legs. And I think that that variety, that takes the excuse away for that I'm tired here. Well, the rest of your body isn't, so you can work at that. Vic, you said range of motion. You talked about flexibility earlier. Why is doing a full range of motion, first of all, what is range of motion, and why is it important for people when they're doing exercise?
Range of motion is basically, if you look at it, a joint has a certain amount of excursion in terms of degrees, and we talk about full range of motion. So if you look at your elbow joint, a full extension would be 0, and if you flex it up, generally you should be able to flex it up to about 100 to 135, right? And so if you're doing resistance training or, anything with range of motion, there are variable exercises. Like, sometimes you might want a short range of motion to strengthen a certain aspect of a biceps, or you might want the full range of motion as you're trying to do mobility in terms of getting the whole range of motion to the rehab or injury and that sort of stuff. And as like Dane has said, there's various techniques, and the other thing is you want to challenge your body too. Like, you don't want to train the same way every time. So you may do, short reps of sets with short range of motion, long range of motions, and, heavier weights. So there's variable patterns that you can do to challenge the muscles and that sort of. But range of motion basically means the joint's ability to move through an arc, which it allows without any impairment through, potential injury or anything else.
One thing that I've been using at home in some of my workouts is actually even playing with the range of motion to promote certain stimulation of the muscle. So doing like partial repetitions, say what I would call like a quarter of the way, the beginning of the movement pattern, also working at the end of the movement pattern, and then doing the full range of motion as well, so that we can look at, kind of burning out or creating stimulation in certain areas of the movement and then promoting the whole movement is a great way to promote some different stimulation if you haven't had that, or if you're looking for a way to get the muscle really fatigued without adding extra equipment.
That's right. We used to do 1 1/4 squats all the time, and your legs would be burning at the end of that. And I think that another thing, just to interject here on this, because this is kind of where I came from as well, is having a full range where you naturally relax the joint might not be the best idea if people are using external weight. Keeping some tension on that muscle, but keeping it strong at the longest, most extended point is important for people. So just taking weights and dropping them and letting your elbow do the stopping, not the best idea, but nice, slow, controlled movements to that end of motion so your tendons are taking force. That's important for people when they're exercising without that supervision. Actually, that's a really good segue into something like, Dane, what are some safety things people should think about if they're exercising at home, especially resistance training?
I think a really important thing exercising at home now is that we do have that personal accountability, which can sometimes be very difficult if we're not used to doing it on our own. So I think learning to differentiate between, say, like a muscular fatigue and what might feel like pain or something that's going to promote injury. Like, for example, if you're working both sides of your body, but you're only feeling fatigue on one side and that sensation, is not pleasant. There's a difference between, again, feeling tired and feeling like that kind of stabby shooting pain, or even some of that tingling that we might get if there's some sort of like neurological thing happening. So being aware of how our movement is balanced, and also even like what muscles we're using. So if you're thinking, okay, this is an exercise for my back, but I'm not feeling anything in my back, back. Maybe my arms are just fatiguing. Or a really classic example is doing exercise for the glutes and only feeling it in the low back instead. Knowing even what area you're targeting so that you can be really aware of how that's feeling so that you're not promoting